So, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome all to this first scanning conversation, part of our Conservation Futures Dialogues. I'm Francesca Masoero, one of the curators of the Conservation Future Dialogues at Global Diversity Foundation, and I'm especially pleased to welcome you all to this exciting panel conversation entitled Part 1, When Things Fall Apart. Which brings together brilliant practitioners and speakers in the realm of conservation and beyond, such as Pat McCabe, Rachel Ikemeh, and Neema Broome. We feel very honored for you to have accepted this invitation. And thanks a lot to Dr. Carolyn Finney for having accompanied us over the last months in this journey into the potential futures of conservation, and also for offering to facilitate and be part of this panel.
You know, I'm part of your ride or die. That's how we go. That's how we roll.
Exactly. I'll shortly leave you the floor, Carolyn.
Yes.
But just before doing so, I'll briefly share with you all a bit about the Conservation Futures Dialogues, which is part of a broader program of work led by GDF around conservation justice, a program that also comprises another key project called the Communities and Conservation Fellowships, the CCF, which had a first edition between 2023 and 24, and in which Rachel actually participated as a fellow, and whose next edition, by the way, will be soon announced. So I invite you to keep an eye on GDF's website and social media if you're interested in applying to the fellowship. So while the fellowship responds to the very pressing need to sustain grassroots and indigenous conservation leaders in addressing some of the structural injustices and inequalities rooted in conservation, the Conservation Futures Dialogues is more of a collective and open-ended inquiry where we have allowed ourselves to sit with the messiness and complexities of the relations, positions, and dispositions that compose this field. And it has also been a privileged space to start questioning what colonizing conservation can mean, and even more so how we can radically reimagine its futures. So we really hope today's conversation will open up some of these spaces for collective reflection and speculation. And for this purpose, I really want to welcome each and every one of you to actively engage in the conversation, note questions and reflections, and we will dedicate the last 20 minutes or so of this call to have your voice coming into the space. Just a concluding note and a couple of house rules. I kindly ask you to keep your mics off when you're not speaking, to use the hand up button to us to speak when we will open the open discussion, and to use the chat as well if you prefer to share your questions. The last note is that, as you probably all saw, the conversation is being recorded and will be made available on the GDF website and YouTube channel in the coming days. So if you don't want your face to appear on the video, just please keep your camera off. So once again, thank you all for joining, and especially our speakers. And Carolyn, I leave you the floor.
Yes, because Carolyn likes to have the floor. Welcome, everybody. I'm glad that we can be here today. I'm just glad to be in community and in conversation around everything that's happening and how we are all working to remain upright, working to remain in relationship, and thinking about this current moment. I meant it actually. I know I was joking around when I said ride or die with GDF and any group of people that are thinking forward and fully in how we remain whole, and how we remain true to a set of intentions. And I think that will arise out of this conversation today. So I wanted to give those who are joining in just a sense of how we're going to do this. We want this as much as I'm the moderator, we want this to be a conversation with the panel here. So I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves and take a few minutes to do that, and then, put a question out on the floor, and we're going to see what emerges. We have some idea of the things that we want to talk about in the Rise, but I'm not here to reel anything in. I'm here to help kind of co-create and hold the space so that everybody can show up as fully as possible. Everything counts. So there's no rule in terms of what people say and how people say that. And I feel like I should introduce myself, but I'm not going to take up too much space. Amazing. I want to say that I'm presently living in Burlington, Vermont, and I keep looking over at my window because it's actually snowing. I don't know what's happening. It was 60 degrees yesterday. I live in Burlington, Vermont because I do a part-time residency at the Franklin Environmental Center at Middlebury College. I spend probably the bulk of my time, or I split my time between Middlebury and, feeding a public platform where I can show up in a variety of ways to talk about issues of race, land, identity, environment, justice, sense of belonging, you name it. I try to kind of lean into what that is for myself as well as for the broader community as a whole. Something I heard someone say is I call myself a storyteller because I like to tell stories through speaking, writing, facilitating, consulting, teaching, whatever way that I can get in, because I believe everybody has a story, and that's a place where we can always stand in relationship, whether it's with each other or whether it's with non-human nature, right? Non-human species. That's the short version of me. So I'd like to turn it over. I don't know who wants to go next, who feels. We've got Neema, we've got Rachel, we've got Woman Stand Shining, Pat McCabe, who would like to bring themselves into the room?
Okay, I go. Thank you, Carolyn. That was lovely introduction. Nice to be here with you all. So I'm speaking to you all from a small, not so small anymore, town in India, Pune. And I live in a urban forest, which we are trying to hold on to despite very rapid and undesirable changes around us, which is transforming our landscape, which used to be a rural landscape till not so long ago, which is also the story of India in general, because things are transforming so fast as we are on this fast track mode to become a mega economic power. So, but I wasn't born in Pune. I was born in a small Himalayan village up north, and in a culture which is very closely linked to the surrounding forest, and which is what, of course, created a kind of connection with anything that was natural, other species. And I studied environmental science, conservation, biodiversity conservation, and wildlife management, which was kind of a very natural progression for me. And then, which led me to join this organization that I continue to be part of 2 decades later, called Kalpavriksha. And one of the first things that I did was I was part of a team which was assessing the management status of the government designated protected areas in some of the states in India. And this was my first exposure to the kind of injustices and violation of human rights that local communities in those areas were facing, even though my training was very different. So then a search for an alternative way of being took me to a central Indian forest, a very small village in the central India, called Mindhalekha, where I lived for some time and with my friends unlearned a lot of things that I had learned so far, and started understanding indigenous ways of doing conservation, and which is what my current work is with ICCA consortium and with Kalpavriksha, which predominantly includes supporting local resistance movements towards defending their territories, supporting co-creation of knowledge with friends, any struggles towards rights of local communities. This is basically what we are doing currently. And I also hold a post as International Policy Coordinator for ICCA Consortium right now. Thank you very much. Very happy to be here with you all.
Thank you, Neema. Fantastic. Who'd like to go next?
I can go
Yeah,
next.
I'll go.
Go
Oh,
ahead. Go ahead, Rachel. Go for it.
All right. Thank you so much. It's such an honor for me to be here. And Francesca rightly introduced me. I'm one of the CCF fellows from last year, the maiden edition of CCF. I can say for a fact it was a life-changing experience and meeting Caroline and really getting to know in depth the reason why we do what we do as conservation or whatever field it is, all of the fellows came to do. So I think it is a lot from that, should I say, reawakening that I experienced at the CCF that I probably would be introducing myself from. So my name is Rachel Ashegbofe Ikemeh. I'm a Nigerian conservationist, biodiversity management strategist, and I kind of consider myself to be a change advocate. Probably in the past, I would say an environmentalist, somebody advocating for conservation, but to a very large extent, it's really evolved and it's really gone beyond that. And I think I should be able to be confident enough to say I have actually being able to position myself as a catalyst for change within the landscape where I work in southern Nigeria. So I'm the founder director of a grassroots focused organization called Southwest Niger Delta Forest Project. And with my team, I used to say we are a very small team, but I don't know if 93 persons is still small. But anyways, we are now like a team of 93 people. And yeah, sometimes it shocks me that I lead that number of people. But anyways, we still feel small because it's so much work, and but we still feel like there is so much to do, and there's just still very few of us doing it. And so with my team, we've led critical conservation interventions in the Niger Delta landscape in Nigeria and in the southwestern and some parts of southwestern Nigeria. And we've been able to bring species back from the brink of extinction. And most importantly, done something nobody has ever done in what you would call Africa's biggest or Africa's biggest, it's not what you call, but literally it is Africa's biggest population. And we've created protected areas from scratch. And now we have 6 protected areas and counting. And most of it is through working with indigenous communities. And we've been able to bring so much, shall I say, awareness and just potentials and possibilities to the working or the and just to bring more light to the potentials that indigenous communities hold in driving conservation efforts across board. So we also have helped to influence policies and management strategies at state and local government level within the country. So I guess that's sort of like a summary. I don't know if it's a good summary of my work, but anyways, and also I probably like Caroline, I think I like to see myself also as a storyteller. Recently, we've started doing so much in doing a lot of communication, creating communication ideas for increasing public education in the country. We're doing radio programs and just bringing, there's just so much we're doing in that space right now within the country. And I feel that has been at the center of what I'm doing. And I'm quite very, very passionate about public education. And I believe that the only sustainability we can actually have for conservation efforts or any form of environmental stewardship is when we get people on board and give them abundance of information that they need to participate, not just to hear about it or share voices or lend their voices, but to participate in conservation processes. Thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this discussion.
Thank you, Rachel. Fantastic.
Wow. Thank you. That was very inspiring already. Thank you. My mama named me Patricia Catherine McCabe, and I say that if I went into all the details of that name, it would be the history of the United States, uh, how I end up in that in that place. Um, and I'm Dene. So I'll say She'e'ia, Tachi Inashli, Aro Ashi Ibashishchi, Ma'idish Gejne Dashanale, and Klaus Chida Sheche, Guatawas Dani Nashli. So this is how we introduce ourselves formally. I'm telling you my clans, in case I have any clan relatives out there. Uh, we like to identify ourselves to each other. And then I was also adopted into the Lakota, another indigenous people, um, into the Lakota spiritual way of life, and that's how I came to have the name Weakpa Najinwi, and that translates roughly to womaning, standing, shining, I guess I'll say. And I live here in northern New Mexico. Um, so I feel I have a little bit of imposter syndrome here. I don't always call myself a conservationist exactly. So, but then again, I think, yeah, but you are also. So I'll just name that, I feel like my what I'm working to conserve deeply is the understanding or the possibility or the conversation around what does it mean to uphold and conserve the honor of being human being in the circle of all the rest of the life, the sacred hoop. And I have my little diagram here. Maybe some people know the medicine wheel. But for me, this is a guiding principle about the nature of where we are, who we are, where we are, how it is, if I may be so bold. But the primary thing is that, as Thich Nhat Hanh calls us, interbeing. And so I feel like what comes from the cultures that I am a part of and that I'm a practicing member of is that you know everything that any one of us does, anything that any living thing does affects the whole. And so what does that mean for our actions? What does that mean for our thoughts? What does that mean for our words? What does that mean for our relationships? And then what does that mean for our actions? And also really taking a deep look at what is correct for the human scope to be, if indeed what happens to the beavers, what happens to the platypus, what happens to the whales, what happens to the forests, affects everything. So I feel like part of my conservation is conserving a sense of right relations, right size. And I feel like there are different, one thing I say is if sustainability is the highest and most sought after technology on the planet, who should we be talking to? We should be talking to those peoples who've known how to live in one place over an extended period of time, 1,000 years, 5,000 years, 10,000 years, 20,000 years in place in relative health, harmony, and happiness. So we have examples of human culture, human community, and also relational, I call it social technologies between peoples with differing cosmologies, languages that are unintelligible to each other. And we had ways of being in deep relationships. So to have the kind of sustainability that we're talking about there is a profound relationship going on to place that involves not more than just the intellect, more than finance. I call it the mad love affair. And I like that. I feel like sustainability is such a sterile word. And so to enter to anytime you're going to enter in on somebody's mad love affair, there are things to consider, right? And so these are the social technologies that I feel like these groups of human beings that we call indigenous have held. And I think that if we were to examine some of that today, that we could understand a little bit more about right relations. But I'll also say that I am currently taking on stewardship of land at one of our sacred sites for my people, Dene people, and also other indigenous people. So I have to acknowledge that as well. It's not just only, these places didn't belong to anybody, but they had significance for us. And so I'm also part of probably communities of, I don't know, probably at this point about 25 different indigenous communities in what we now call North America, this superimposed nation state upon indigenous continent. And they're all concerned with taking on the stewardship. It's a movement called Land Back here in the United States, and it's referring to land back to indigenous stewardship. But I have other thoughts about what that means, and maybe I'll get into that with these questions. But so there's a conservation going on in those spaces of the health and well-being and the relational significance, and I'm going to say the spiritual significance and the cosmic significance of these places. But there's also, therefore, conservation of culture and understanding of how to be a particular kind of human presence, and I call it a human presence that is moving towards a word I coined, omnibeneficence, to be a benefit, blessing to all. So yeah, I guess I'll claim my seat as conservationist there. And
there you go. You got there, Pat. You got there.
Got it.
Yes, you did. That was great. Thank you. I made the mistake of when I was starting off and asking you all to introduce yourself, that I meant to say, first of all, that how both honored, grateful, and excited that I am to be here, all three of you. Neema, this is only the second time I've talked with you, and I've met you only this past month once, and I'm excited to learn more about how you show up every day and who you are. And I could tell in our first conversation there was going to be some heat on the table, and so I got very excited. Rachel, we met each other last year, and I was just blown away by your the fullness of who you are, the way that you are unapologetic about who you are, how much you love not only your children, but how you love your work and what it is you do, and show up with that full presence. And Pat, man, I'm already taking so many notes, and you've only been talking for a couple of minutes. I'm like, she needs to stop dropping the knowledge. No, never stop dropping the knowledge. I'm always just like, I get a little bit of imposter syndrome because I'm like, what am I doing here with these people? This is my moment. I shouldn't have said all that out loud. So I'm just really grateful. So the first question, which is going to be I'm going to meander a bit, and that's on purpose, even though I have 4 or 5 things down here I'm hoping we get to. And in part because I like to take what I hear some of you say, and I was thinking about Rachel talking about curating, I think you said curating conservation, but you might have said curating conversation, and both those things actually work for me in this moment in terms of what we're thinking about. And Pat, me hearing you say about conserving the nature of human being and asking the question, what is correct? You said a lot more than that, but I sort of took out of that, what is correct and what has significance for us at this moment. And I want to think about all those things in the context of disruption, which is really the first question. And I don't know about all of you, but I mean, there's a level of stress that I feel within my own body and my own heart, as well as there's a level of stress that I can see and I'm engaging with out in the world, because everybody is having a moment, whether we're here in the United States, whether we're somewhere else in the world, right? Because of course, everything is connected. And so there's a flow of energy that's happening. And it's been interesting because I've often seen the term disruption used as a negative term. Things are getting disrupted. Supply chains are getting disrupted. People's lives are getting disrupted. And those things aren't untrue. And what I want to push back on and ask us to talk about and consider disruption is neither good nor bad, but something that's happening, an opportunity. What does it mean? I mean, the title of this conversation today, borrowing from Chinua Achebe, is, when things fall apart, and things are falling apart. And what does that mean for us in this conversation about conservation? What is this? And the things that each of us have chosen to be tasked with conserving. What does it mean in terms of how we show up? What are we being asked to do? What is our capacity to do it? How do we feel about it? How do we feel about disruption? What does that mean for us and our communities? And I mean communities in the broadest sense, not just other human beings, but other species as well. And I just want to, as a sort of side note, something you said, Pat, and this might have been what you meant, but the way that I heard it, and the idea that we, if we want to talk about sustainability, that we would talk to indigenous cultures. We should talk to indigenous cultures because they've been here for a very long time. And I was also thinking in my own sort of learning and growth is how the other species that have been here a long time, right, have also, maybe have something to say, something to teach us. So disruption. What do you think? How do you feel? What does that look like for you where you are? You can talk about it from a personal place. You can talk about it from a community place, whatever works for you. There's no wrong way to come at it. I call this reclaiming disruption. So how do we reclaim it? Yes, I said that with attitude. Yeah, Rachel. She's right in there. Yes.
Yeah, and I think it just reminds me back to last May and just meeting you, and then how somehow our energies sort of kind of align. Because the funny thing is, and I think I should let everyone on the call know that we had a prep call, but I couldn't make it. And so I didn't know this question was going to come up. And the reason I was the first to raise up my mind, it will be shocking. Maybe it will be shocking to others, but probably not to you, Caroline. But 2 days, just like a few days ago, I'm sure it was a very few days ago, maybe 2 or 3 days ago, I said those words to myself. I said, I am a disruptor. Like literally, I was thinking, now I really can't remember what direction my thinking was, but I think at the end of the line, I just said those words, and I was at peace with it, and completely at peace with it. And I probably wouldn't be months before now, a year before now. But over time, I've been doing a lot of reflecting about, like I said earlier, there's been so many things, CCF being part of it as well, really causing me to question why I do certain things, why I'm still in conservation. So this year I marked 20 years as a conservationist, and it's caused me to really reflect a lot on my journey and just where I want to really see myself in under 20 years from now. And then whether I really want to still keep doing this, and whether it's something that, because I feel like if there was some achievement to be named, I would feel like I've ticked certain boxes and then I'm fine. And I could go on to do some things I enjoy. And then, but why am I still here? Why am I still holding on? And so those are the questions I keep asking myself. And I find also that there are some things also I'm reflecting on how just the outcomes of some of the work we're doing. Like I said earlier, we work with indigenous communities, and we've come to a place where we give them voice. Like literally, we went from doing conservation, prioritizing wildlife, to now start finding that beyond wildlife, there were people that need saving. So if there was anything anybody needs to do a background check about the location of the landscape where I work, is the Niger Delta. So there's a lot of history of oil. There's a lot of history of human rights abuses. 50 years of environmental injustice, not just destruction of people's livelihoods, but just their way of living, everything literally coming back to our word, disrupted. Like literally their lives, their histories, their traditions have just been disrupted by this resource. And then just coming off from some of the activities we did with them last month, and then a lot of people have just been shocked about how communities we are working with are now the ones advocating for conservation. It wasn't always like this. Now they have their voice. We literally moved out of the way, and they are the ones saying we want conservation, we demand it, and whatever policies that are required to make it work for us, that's what we want. So I think doing this 360, of course, it's very fulfilling for us as an organization, but for just also realizing that we were instrumental to that change. We are instrumental, and it's not just one. It's like now it's just spiraling to me, it's out of control right now, because like I said, we now have lots of communities subscribing to conservation, wanting to partner with this conservation idea, and we don't have enough resource to help them on that part, like to onboard as many as are interested at the pace at which they are requesting for it. So anyways, just to cut all of this short, I think my own answer to that is really that what I understand by being a disruptor is allowing yourself to not conform. I think recently somebody asked me, I was speaking to someone just about what we were doing and how it would have been easy, or the initial path for us to have done this work in the beginning was to work through the government or with the government to some extent, and it would have repeated the same circle of I don't know, whatever was there before, where there was nothing to work with. But this was a very difficult part. And I shared with the person, and I said, it took us 8 years to strike the first deal with a community. And now we went from one community, and within 4 or 5 years, we now have 6 communities subscribing to our efforts within a very short period of time. And I say, this is better, because now the communities can engage with the government instead of us being like the middle person between community and government. And I was just really sharing about how that, for me, it changed me, rather than, just making me see that there is power in my thinking, that if this is not right, then I don't have to conform to it. If a certain path is not working, I've assessed it, I've reviewed it, I've seen other people go this path just because it's popular, and I choose another path, whether it's popular or not, whether it's difficult or not. I think I'm willing to go that path, because I realize that ultimately at the end of that road would lead to something different. And just to close with this, I've heard maybe preachers or people, motivational speakers, say that if we keep doing the same thing and expect a different result, it's foolishness. And I think really that's what makes disruption in the very essence of it positive, more positive than it is negative, especially now in our world today.
Thank you, Rachel. So disruption, as I wrote down, you said, as sort of the opposite of conforming, as an opportunity to do something different, to move forward. Thank you. Pat or Neema, well, what are you thinking about in terms of disruption? Reclaiming it.
Yeah, that was lovely hearing Rachel talk about disruption. And I think most of us come from cultures where disruption is not necessarily, as you said, is a negative term, because Shiva in our culture represents disruption, so that something new can be created, because sometimes, however beautiful things look, they need to be disrupted for it to be reinventing itself. And I think most of us are here together today because we are the people, we rise from the rubbles of disruption. So I think for me, sometimes in the recent times, it has been disturbing to see what is being disrupted and who is disrupting it, and to see that power, what power people have over others to disrupt something which we do not want to be disrupted. So sometimes it's quite disturbing for me. And what is the most disturbing part is when the disruption happens of the way we are, who we are, our worldviews. That's the most disturbing disruption. And it's been happening over a period of time when we have been historically colonized. But in the recent time, our own governments, which are no different from colonial governments, are disrupting it for the interest of corporates. And I think this, most importantly, as the young people growing up, given an idea of what being human means, what human development means, what human progress means, in which there is no space for spiritual growth, no space for a nourishing society. There is no space for wanting less, living simply so that others can simply live. There is no space for those ideas, but it's a very economically driven, ever increasing profit-based notion of human progress. And that is something that needs to be disrupted by those who think differently, who has lesser voices. And I think this is where much of our action comes in, because it's not that there are many people. There are not few people who feel that this is not something that we want. So in the recent time, our efforts have gone towards identifying friends, alliances, where such resistance against this disruption is happening of our worldviews, and then supporting them. In what way can we support? By co-creating our narratives, and maybe building alliances, building friendships. And that's what we are trying to do. Not as like also trying to disrupt those power structures that sometimes come up even in such kind of support. So disruption of any kind of centralized controlling powers is what is important for me, and moving towards more inclusive, I think, as all of us were talking about, where we have a collective power over centralized power of a few. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Neema. Yeah, so I wrote down a few key things that I heard. What happens when there's no space for spiritual growth and human development, and I guess and I interpreted it as sort of a deeper understanding of who we are and who we can become, right? Especially for young people. I like to say now, especially for new people, new people coming in. The importance of building alliances and disruption as a tool for, in terms of when we think about where the power lies. What I heard was institutional power, power that makes decisions often for the rest of us, that aren't necessarily, they don't necessarily serve some of the deeper concerns that many of us might have about who we want to be in terms of right relation. Pat, what do you think? Thank you, Neema, for that. What do you think?
Well, I'm going to go back to my little tool here. Let's see if we can see it. So it's got 4 colors. It's a circle with a equilateral cross in the center. We say it's speaking to all that we understand lies in each of the 4 directions. It also speaks to all the colors of human beings. Anyway, so with this, what I was told is that every single life form has given a seat, the honor of having a seat on this sacred hoop of life, including the human being. So we're not the whole hoop, we just get a seat on the hoop. Very important part of this. But so every single life form has to uphold its part of this hoop, or the integrity of the hoop begins to fail. And so I feel like that's what we're witnessing in terms of our Earth. Meanwhile, we got this huge human political ruckus going on, but the Earth is also speaking super loudly, and that has kind of gone into the background, which is not wise. It's not ideal that has happened, because she's the boss, okay? But anyway, so if every member has to be able to uphold their part in order for this circle to remain intact, and intact, what do we mean by that? And in order for all the life to be thriving. And so that also means that every member has to be able to enact their way of upholding this hoop, and I call it their perfect design for thriving life. So every member has to be able to enact its perfect design for thriving life. I'm not sure human beings are very clear at this point on what our perfect design for thriving life is, or our place in a situation like this. And all that is to say, so this is how interrelated we are. This is how interconnected. Thich Nhat Hanh calls us interbeing, right? So we could say that this whole earth, all the organisms, plant, mineral, liquid, solid, flying ones, swimming ones, creepy crawling ones, four-legged ones, five-fingered ones, or two-legged ones, as we sometimes say for human beings, it's all a single organism. So if it's a single organism in which every member is being called on to make their contribution in fullness in order for this to have its optimal presence, I guess, and an optimal way of life. So I bring that up because it's a different way of framing the words. Disruption of supremacy. Disruption of supremacy is what I feel like we're working with in general. So supremacy between genders, supremacy, white supremacy, but also human supremacy and dominate in this understanding of domination of life, of all the life, having a right to extract to the point of preventing huge numbers of life members of this sacred hoop from being able to enact their perfect design for thriving life. And so, in an interbeing situation, supremacy is not the tactic. Supremacy is not the modality for having peaceful, beautiful life for anybody. And so, the delusion of the supremacy taking place right now is that there can be winners and losers. That it's okay for some people to have everything they want, and not just people, but other members of the hoop of life have nothing, or are given, deprived. So eventually what happens there is the whole thing falls. And so I often use this symbol for that structure of supremacy, right? So in this, I call it the power over paradigm. In the power over paradigm, you must have power over another in order to have what you need. And for me, this is antithetical to the structure of Earth. So it's a superimposed concept. And this is where we get in trouble when we only use this modality of intellect. But it's a superimposed structure upon a very, very different structure, right? So I say that the economy of Earth is radical abundance and fearless generosity. If you have one fruit tree, you'll know exactly what I mean. Because when that fruit tree really goes, and mine are starting to blossom and bud at last. I hope they're not premature, but who knows? Like you say, it's snowing over there in Vermont today, Carolyn.
Yes.
But my apple tree will throw down 1,000 apples, and each apple has the potential to make 6 or 8 more apple trees. So this is what I'm talking about: radical abundance, fearless generosity. So all that is to say that, as I'm listening to my fellow panelists and thinking about my own people, so our cultures already, indigenous cultures, have already had a disruption, interloping, I guess I'll say, of a supremacy that came in and wanted to change us and change our relationship to land and our relationship to all the rest of the life. And so we've been working with that, for a while now. And so I think different peoples are oriented towards disruption in different ways, right? So I would say for indigenous peoples to have this deep sense of an unjust disruption, and so much of the energy is directed back towards pushing back against those disruptions. And so I'm not saying that I mean, that only makes sense, right? And at the same time, at this moment, I feel like I don't know, as I keep my eye on Earth, and not solely on the human dynamic. There's an expansion there for me around what kind of disruption can be good trouble, so to speak, right? But I'll go back to my specific example of taking on the stewardship of this land. So in order for that to take place, there had to be a disruption of a certain kind of thinking. And one of the disruptions I could point out there is this disruption that somehow indigenous cultures is inferior to, well, basically European culture. And also there was a disruption of hoarding of wealth by some, because they said, the people who helped with the purchase of this land said, we know that our wealth came from oil, timber, and land theft. And we don't feel like that was right. In the establishment of this superimposed nation state upon indigenous continent, we don't like that role. And we're doing something to try to realign our lineage and to make right relations. And so we want to, not, instead of holding that wealth and believing that that's going to be somehow our salvation, we're starting to disperse. And so I feel like this is a huge piece, and this is also something that I work on deeply, reimagining money and protecting the sacred. So that's a disruption of a certain story around money. I mean, we made up money, so money can have whatever meaning we want it to have. So we can disrupt the old stories around it. And one thing I'll say there, and then maybe I should stop, but I'll say that I say for all this hoarding of wealth and amassing of wealth, I say there's only one place that wealth could have ever come from. It came from the earth. It came out of the life. It came out of the bodies of life. It came out of the psyches and souls of human beings. And so to withhold it and to dam it up is to withhold and dam life from life. And right now life is screaming out for life. And so it's time to reconsider what that means. As they say, you can't make money on a dead planet. So and even to say that, I was recently with folks who I think are pretty well on board. I feel like they've conceptualized life. Here in our valley, they're moving around water rights on paper. So they've conceptualized water, and now they're trying to make it play out on the land. And so this intellectual power that we have is definitely a mixed blessing, right? And so to conceptualize Earth, there are those who are ready to extract everything, and I'm going to ask us all to watch out for this because it's real. They're ready to extract everything out of the earth and call it done, and try to blast off and live in space somewhere. That's the next move, and I think there are big powers that play in this particular nation that I'm in, where that's at play, and that's part of where that disruption is coming from. So I'll stop there.
Yeah. Oh my God. It's so hard for me not to say anything. What? Yes. I just want to say a response I have. There's a few other things I want to put on the table because I'm watching the time and that people can chime in. And I want to respond to, the question I have. And so how do we build our capacity to do that? If we agree, and I don't think we do, I agree, but I'm saying the larger we agrees about what disruption is, what needs to be disrupted, because I think there's also a lot of fear. I mean, I often think that, we live in a capitalist system, and I'm of the opinion we've all been impacted by that in various ways, good and bad. We're tied into the system. It's like it's even hard. I mean, I say to people, if I go take off somewhere and disappear and just erase myself entirely and literally live in a cave I'd have to I don't even know how I could live off the land because it probably is owned by somebody. I don't even know what all that is. Like, how would I extricate myself from that, right? And do we have to do that? Which I don't think we have to. I think part of the gift of our intellect, I think it can also get in our way, much like I felt you were saying, Pat. But I think also part of the gift is that we have a creative impulse. One of the things an easy example I've been saying to students lately is that, while I watch the erasure of our history here in this United States around slavery, I mean, people trying to even take the word off websites, so we don't want to talk about that the Underground Railroad was a creative response by a wide range of people to something. It was a disruption of business as usual and something that cost lives and also saved lives and took us down a different path historically. And part of me has been wondering what are the different ways that how does that look now? Like, I don't think it's just a one thing. And Pat, you really covered a lot of ground there. So it was clearly it's not just one thing. There's supremacy, right? There's the belief that economic wealth, is going to get us where we need to go. There's the question of power, who gets to make, is determining, let's extract everything we can from the earth. And then some of us, a small group, are going to take off for another planet. We're just going to use this as we see fit. So the other two things or three things I want to put on the table, and y'all can grab it as you see fit. One was the idea of remaking relationship. So part of what I have heard all of you say, either explicitly or implicitly, that relationship, whether it's between each other, whether it's across differences, whether it's with non-human species, how do we remake that relationship? One of the things as part of this larger project of Conservation Futures is the last few months, myself and Akshay Chetri, we've been interviewing people from around the world who work in different places within conservation. Some who are funders, some who are community activists, some who are artists, some who, work in national parks, just, to have these conversations about what they think the challenges are, where they're at now, where they would like to see us go. And one of the things that's come up in different forms is how about remaking relationships. So whether we're talking so deeply and spiritually about that, whether we're talking about funders to communities, this global relationship, the idea that particularly here in the United States, I often feel like where the United States puts itself at the center of every single conversation, which is not a relationship to the rest of the world, right? Or maybe it is a relationship, but I don't necessarily think it's one that is supportive. There's a lot more I can say. So thinking about remaking relationship and what that means to you. Redefining conservation, which for me has always been at the core. The idea conservation, at least as initially imagined here in the United States, was defined as extractive. We called the earth a natural resource. And then it's about managing that resource for our use. So we've centered ourselves, we've separated ourselves from it, and we see it as a resource, which is something a number of you have been saying already today. What does it look like in terms of redefining conservation, what it is, and who gets to decide that? And then I sort of want to throw in there, the last thing is around spirit, the role of spirit, faith, and belief. One of the things that I've been sometimes I struggle with and sometimes I get frustrated with in general is the way that in some conversations in conservation, especially whether it's in academic circles, whether it's in political circles, bringing in spirit, faith, and belief becomes this kind of woo-woo moment. It's sort of considered light. It has this sort of removed experience. It romanticizes certain groups of people over others. It's not necessarily understood as something of space. I think we all occupy, we show up in the world with that. How is that? And maybe this is something we learn from indigenous communities and other communities and spaces that have held that as part of who they are. I don't want to use words like natural and normal, but it is intrinsic to who they are. And so therefore they're experienced with that and don't have to apologize for it or explain it even. It just is. But for some others of us who it is something that's very separated from who we are, and bringing that into this conversation about conservation and doing it differently in relationship, what you see is the role of that and how that might be done, or maybe it shouldn't be done. I don't want to make any assumptions here. So remaking relationship, redefining conservation, the role of spirit / faith / belief. and its role in culture and in thinking about the future of conservation. Oh, just a couple of small questions that I want to put out on the table and see what y'all have to say about that.
Well, I'll hop in on that, all that.
You were just like ready. Yes. Hop down on that.
Well, first of all, I just can't tell you, I had this shiver run through my body when you said we live in a capitalist system. And then you went on to explain that. But for me, my immediate response was no, we live in an earth system. And we keep forgetting that that's actually first and foremost where we are, who we are, where we are, how it is. And we can make up all kind of fantasies and fairy tales and stories about it, but this is where we get our life from, and she has a way. She has a way. So the question is, what do we know about her way? Because I say all false authorities will bow to her eventually. It can be no other way. It can be no other way. And in an indigenous culture, we also keep a much longer history time frame than modern science does. And so we say that maybe you've heard indigenous people say this is the fifth world or the sixth world. That's because we've lost worlds before.
Yeah.
And so there are certain teachings that come out of that. So just thinking about that. And then as for the woo-woo, so I have a much longer piece that I say about it, but my conclusion about the people who've had the greatest, I'll say, success in terms of if thriving life is a measure of success, which it probably ought to be, since it seems like the whole plan here on Earth is life. I mean, that's the plan. Everything out there is doing one thing. It's trying to make more life, trying to make more life, trying to make more life. I mean, the whole plan here, it's life. So, so I say the people who've had the most success, human beings around thriving life, I say they have a broad spectrum of ways of knowing. You called it an intrinsic characteristic, their spiritual nature. And so what I say is, the hallmark of indigenous people is the song, the dance, oftentimes certain ways of visioning, and also they have relationships, and it's mutual. It's not just going one way with things that mostly Western mindset, the scientific method, the power over paradigm says you can't have relationships with those things in that way. And yet the people who've had the best track record of thriving life way have this huge spectrum of ways of knowing as a human being. And so I think every human being has this broad spectrum of ways of knowing, and I don't think it's an accident. And so those other ways, the scientific method, which wants you to be able to repeat things and weigh things and measure things, says, I think that's where we come into this reluctance at best about what we call woo-woo.
Yeah.
So when people want to know about, well, how do indigenous people, how do they manage this or that or the other thing? I said, well, first thing we're going to have to work on is that embedded place of what you call woo-woo and the shame and fear around it.
Yeah.
Because I say try having a mad love affair with anything, with intellect only. No fun. No fun. Doesn't really go anywhere. Doesn't really access the depth and mystery that is possible, right? And so that's true for the mad love affair with Earth. So I say it's not a coincidence that the people with the best track record of, quote, sustainability also have this very diverse, broad spectrum of ways of knowing. And in fact, my elders say that intellect is the least reliable way of knowing anything.
Mm-hmm.
And redefining conservation, I'll just say that my daughter is a young woman named Lila June Johnston, and she wrote her PhD recently on traditional land management practices. And her conclusion, so when I hear the word conservation, because now that I'm stewarding this land, there's all this talk about, well, you should put some conservation moves on it. And I say, well, one, I got to listen to the land first to see what she really wants, and because conservation legalities are permanent, well, as long as rule of law holds, which used to be a solid thing, not so much today. But I say, you know, human beings have had some very deep cooperation and collaboration. And that's what my daughter's work is pointing to. All the places where human beings, like we created the hardwood forests in the southeast. We've created kelp beds that still stand today, oyster beds that still stand today. Even the rainforest in South America was human cultivation and cooperation and collaboration. And so, you know, when we say conservation, we tend to think, you know, I think it's part of our low self-esteem as a species of saying we could just get the human beings off of it, right? But my daughter calls us a keystone species. And so for me, that conservation part is again, you know, and this is part of your question, remaking relationship, but I'll stop there.
Okay. Thank you, Pat. Rachel or Neema? Yeah, Rachel.
Okay, so I'm sorry, I'm going to kind of like be a disruptor. I'm
Never
sorry.
apologize. Remember I said never apologize.
Okay, I'm disrupting in sense of okay, I actually agree with Caroline that we live in a capitalist system. I do certainly. I actually believe, without trying to put some kind of microscope on my own life, but even personal relationships have become a bit of a capitalist system. And the reason I say that is because I believe most relationships, and I may be wrong, and I may be speaking from different contexts and different scenarios, but I think to a large extent, most relationships have been so defined, even at personal level, on what can be gotten from that relationship. What can I get out of this? What can I get out of it? And in the end, that's the capitalist mindset. And I doubt if, yes, there could be, or there are relationships that are not based on that. They are quite genuine, they're in different categories. But I actually feel that even in collaborations that we see, recently I was thinking a lot about this. What are all the collaborations, even in the professional landscape amongst colleagues? And many times in my own experience, I've found that it's always what the other, whoever it is that is bringing the ideas for the collaboration, what they stand to get out of it, not necessarily whether our ideologies align or whether there is a common good that will be achieved out of it. So anyways, probably I'm just talking from my own experiences, but I actually believe that in many contexts, whether it's in slavery, is the slave trade, or what have you, colonization of Africa, and what is happening now, where they call it neo-colonization of Africa. I think people redefine relationships. Those people who stand to get something out of it will start to define it in a way that it still benefits them in the end. So whether they talk about aid or bringing aid to Africa, or they talk about it in different contexts, at every point in time, when you scrutinize it, there is something for that party to get out of it. There is never like an innocent, oh, let me just come in here, helping out without expecting anything, or being invited to do it in the person's own way. Like, I bring you in and I'm saying, oh, I have this idea, I want us to do XYZ together. So anyways, I think I'm just blabbing on and on, but I'm just saying that most relationships at the end of the day is centered on that capitalist ideas, many people wanting, many parties wanting to get something out of whatever relationships they are in. And when it doesn't go in that direction, they redefine it in a way that benefits them and makes them look good. So whether you see aid in the context of, oh, they are helping poor African children who could eat, or you could see it in the context of everything else that goes underneath. Whoever narrative you're hearing it from, it's always, whether it's in the context of or from the perspective of the people who are receiving the aid, and many Africans saying, oh, we stand many governments corrupt, or the government's crying, oh, why did the USA stop, and all of that. Anyways, I'm just saying, everybody is just trying to get something out of somebody. So it's just like, it's still a capitalist system. And I really think that it would really take us to live in a totally new world. Like, we start this world all over again for us to be able to break this circle of manipulation, exploitation, whether of the earth resources, of relationships, of people. I'm not sure I'm very optimistic about a better direction. And I'm sorry, I'm being the pessimist about this, because I feel relationships are so important. And this has actually led me to explore a topic, which I say, because I work with indigenous communities, and I ask the question, and I say there is all these people are romanticizing now the idea of indigenous communities stewarding conservation efforts. It's a great, it's a great movement. I'm all for it. I advocate for it. But at the same time, the question I started questioning, the things I started asking are, would indigenous people conserve in this day, in this present world? Would they do conservation without any prompting or any support from an outside external body? Would they do it on their own? I think the assumption, I'm speaking from the context from the landscape in which I work. I think the assumption that communities would ordinarily conserve natural resources in this present world on their own, I think it's really living in a world that it doesn't really exist. I really do think that the world has really evolved in such a way that even people in indigenous communities want the kind of life that is out there, so-called life that is called modern. So they want that. And again, I said I'm speaking in the context of the landscape where I work. So I think while we all advocate for indigenous communities to steward conservation efforts, we should be very, very honest in those conversations about what relationship they currently have. We're not talking about the historical relationship. In this present world, what relationship do they currently have with the land? What relationship do they have there? And I will give an example. Say, for example, in the Niger Delta, there was oil and gas, and there was all those exploitations from multinational companies. And when fishing failed because of oil spills in the rivers, the communities turned to logging, and they brought in external bodies or people from other parts of the country to help them, should I say, plunder. I use that word in deliberately, because that's exactly the situation we met on ground. They literally plundered the forest in a bid to commercialize, to modernize their life, to get a lot of disposable income for them to live the kind of life that they felt was modern, that was wealthy and well placed in the society. And so, yes, for me, I think that's in answering the question of remaking relationships. Now, in redefining conservation, I actually I jotted out something. I think I'm just going to say that. And my idea is that I think that conservation needs to shift a lot from the sensationalized. Sorry, English is failing me now. Okay, so I think conservation needs to move away from making sensations out of wildlife, like just sensationalizing wildlife in itself, but it should be about nature preservation, saving people. And that's the reason why I mentioned earlier about why I entered that storytelling space, because I feel for many years and in and in natural history, filmmaking, or communications, it's been centered on wildlife. It's been centered on how majestic elephants are, how beautiful, and it depends on how you paint it. But I think we should move from there to looking at nature preservation in a way that it really does save lives. It's saving people. And it should be people-centered rather than making it all about a particular species. And I'm not in any way, because I've focused, my work has been built on species-focused conservation. So I'm not in any way watering down what I've done already or what we're doing right now, but in a way to look at the future, I think we should be seeing conservation as how protecting nature is essentially saving people's lives. And when we look at it in the context of environmental destruction and how it's bringing about natural disasters, or as driving those disasters or phenomenon, then we'll really realize that doing conservation, it's no longer something for the elites or for some certain group of people to do tourism, to go to Africa and see gorillas and make their life beautiful, get away from the US for a while or from Europe and give money through tourism to whatever work is going on in Uganda or Rwanda or any part of Africa or elsewhere in the world. But essentially, that conservation is pro-people, it's people-centered, and it's really about bringing people to a place of wholeness, because our lives as humans is really tied to nature. And without nature, when nature is lost, there is a part of us that gets lost in the process, and bringing people back to a place of wholeness. So whether wholeness spiritually, physically, mentally, and actually physically as well, preventing climate change and all of that. So we should really be looking at conservation in that context. And I think this just leads me to your last point of conversation, which is the role of spirit, faith, belief, and in the role of and its role in culture and the future of conservation. Now I'll get a bit personal with this part of the conversation, because I shared with you earlier that a few months ago I marked 20 years in conservation, and I really was reflecting on my journey, and I realized in so many ways that the reason I've stayed on this path, even when it was really difficult and oftentimes very, very dangerous for me to be doing what I'm doing. I mean, dangerous in terms of my own life, the life of my family. And I just always remember, because I'm a Christian and I am very rooted in my faith. And I've been asked that so many times, how you knew this is like the most dangerous place for you to step into, and you went in there and you are just so, so happy with yourself doing conservation. For me, it has always been knowing that there's a scripture, I think it's in the beginning of the Bible, Genesis chapter 2, where God said to Adam, where it's written that, and God put Adam in the garden, and he said to him to tend and to keep it. And some of that scripture also remind me that not just the scripture, that just some things that we've achieved. To be honest, and I'm not just saying this in order to blow my trumpet or to sound in a certain ways like I'm doing something exceptional, but many times I've come to maybe near the situation of face impossible things, and even some members of my team, even myself, I've asked why I'm able to, go through this. I'm able to get to this point and achieve what I've achieved in a sense, in places that's literally or typically impossible even for the government to do. And I started really reflecting on that, on so many parts of what I've read in my Bible about, calling and offices of what people are actually, best to do. Like you're called to this, you're called to do this. So I feel like in many regards, when we step out to do conservation, to champion the cause of conservation or nature preservation, there should be a sense of something greater than ourselves. A sense that there is just a supreme I don't know, force. There is, yes, I think that's the word I'm looking for. There is a supreme force that is greater than ourselves that moves us to do these impossibilities or to stick to difficult situations, no matter no matter what, or to stare difficulty in the face or challenges in the face, and to champion these causes no matter what. And at the end of the day, the outcomes look great for the kind of efforts we put, no matter how small the effort we put into it. And I think I wrap up from there. I don't know if I took all of everyone's time.
No, I mean, there was a lot there, and it was great, Rachel. I just want to, I want to give Neema a minute because we literally have 9 minutes left. And
Thank you.
yeah, and I want to give you
Carolyn,
some
I
time.
understand. It's whatever everybody spoke, it was so rich, and it's such an important topic that I can totally understand. And I don't know whether I can really add too much more to whatever Rachel and Pat have already spoken. But I think I just, in 2 minutes, to say that the 3 questions that you are asking are actually not different from each other. And at the core of it, for me, is actually our spiritual journey. And even in my own personal professional and personal life, basically, the realization that at the end of the day, it's the disconnect that we have with ourselves and our surroundings, and the lack of the spiritual grounding and nourishment is what leads us to do a lot of disruptive things that happen, or builds up egos that then lead to concentration of power or create greed in us. So I think if we understand, and I understand also what you were saying, that there is a fear of the word spiritual because we have seen that itself turning itself into an agent of control, institutionalized religion and politics of it all. So, but I do feel that one of the things that is lacking in defining whether it's relationship amongst ourselves or a newer definition of conservation is our spiritual journeys, how to have that space to reflect upon interdependence, how what harms one harms everyone. What benefits one benefits everyone. And I think Pat said it very well earlier when she was talking about, I think she used the word radical abundance and fearless generosity. So that's what defines conservation for me. Not something which is out there, something that happens out there, but something which is our lived reality. It's non-consumptive, and it comes from radical abundance and fearless generosity. So I would just end it. Thank you.
Oh my gosh, yes, thank you. So a couple of things I want to say, and I guess we'll have a few minutes so audience can ask questions. And I know, Pat, I know there's all of you, there's responses to be said. And what I want to do is I just want to pull out a couple of comments that you each said, because actually, even though there were different ways you came at it, not necessarily quote unquote agreeing. And having said that, I think there's some things where you all connect. Starting with you, Neema, going backwards, what harms one harms everyone. And at the core, it's our spiritual journey. Rachel, you said bringing people to a place of wholeness, and Pat, one of the things I heard is that the whole plan is life. And I don't see this as a zero-sum game necessarily in terms of it's the capitalist system that's controlling it. Actually, it's the earth who's controlling it. I actually think that all those things are operating, in different ways at different times, though I tend to, if I'm going to own my own place, I also agree that for me, the whole plan is life ultimately, and that ultimately, the earth is the earth is what's going to inform those decisions or make those decisions or do what it needs to do. I like the old American comedian George Carlin years ago had a great saying, and my father would repeat it over and over. My father is not known for thinking saying deeply what he was thinking about spiritually, but he would say, he goes, I like that, George Carlin, because he says, we keep saying like we have to save the earth. And he said, the earth, George Carlin would just say, the earth's just going to shake us off. The earth is just going to keep on moving forward. And so there's something there to that, I think. There's more that I want to say, but I want to, if there's anybody out there that has a question, it's a meaty conversation that 90 minutes doesn't serve. And I recognize that. And I should have said this in the beginning, that this conversation isn't about solving anything or even coming to some mutual agreement, or that's not what the conversation is. For me, in part, I understand it as being emergent, as being engaged, as putting everything that we can think of on the table in a way to see what might emerge in this moment between people who are actively engaged in their life, actively engaged in quote unquote the work of, oh, there was something else that you said. I wish I could go back. I've got so many notes here. It's insane. Something to say, the act of, coming to some understanding of who we are as human beings, and coming to some understanding of who we are as human beings at this time, in this place, considering the role of right relation. And for many of us, what that is, I realize I was reminded of the geographical distances. And as a geographer, I'm always thinking about that and scale in the back of my head in some ways. And Rachel, when you were speaking, and, after Pat was speaking, I said, oh, yes, it's not just life histories. It is also the places we occupy and what we see and what we experience and how we take that in and what we're hearing around us, not just from the non-human species, but also the human species. And man, it's just a lot of complexity. And I'm always thinking about our capacity and my capacity to show up to that complexity. And what does that mean? Is there anybody out there that's been listening that has something that they want to ask of the group? Reclaiming relationship, redefining conservation, thinking about the role of spirit, faith, and belief. What are you feeling right now? What do you feel about this? The earth, people, power, fear, shame. These are all words I've heard today. And not one of you have said, and I'm actually kind of happy about that, but I just want to point out that not a single person, including me, used the word hope once. And I'm actually personally relieved because I have some issues with hope, but I don't have issues with faith and belief, I just find that really interesting that nobody used it, and because I've been hearing it used a lot as a way to move us forward. I don't know. Well, we've got a few minutes, and we got 2 minutes. Anybody, even on the panel? No one in the Zoom atmosphere wants to add anything. I know we all got stuff. Anybody want to take some of the last couple of words, couple of moments? Oh, I knew Woman Stand Shining. I was looking at you.
Well, living my name like big time here. I'm not sure. That happens every so often.
And there's a light coming down from
and all of a sudden it's
yeah, you've got this light above you, so the things, it's like, okay, speak, Pat, speak.
So, I was talking about this, the transition, the loss of worlds, and I actually feel like we're in a transition now between one world and the next. And so for me, and when I was told about when we lost a world to the Great Flood, they say that Dragonfly came and told the people to get inside the hollow reed, and that if they did that they could survive. And so they did. The floodwaters rose, but not over the top of the reed, and then fell. And so it was only those few people who emerged to begin the next cycle of human presence on the planet. And so I'll just say that for myself, I've just found myself asking, you know, I'm not saying that I know what kind of world transition. I don't know. We already have a lot of life lost, but I'm just saying that I've said, how can my life serve? How can what I'm doing serve those who emerge out of the hollow reed right now? And that does several things for me. One is like I'm really connected to the soil that they will have to plant whatever the seeds that they want to sow for the future. And so I'm really concerned with the quality of that soil. So for me, a lot of my work is also around reparation, forgiveness, because I feel like if with whatever emerges next, if they can plant seeds in soil that's not filled with bitterness and sorrow and despair, and you know, we have 2020 hindsight. There's a lot we can clean up and repair. And so I guess that's just how I think about it. And it also moves the place inside of me where I'm not only concerned with myself and oh my God, how am I going to make it? And with all these circumstances and these things closing in and such, I'm redirected. And to me, that's an alignment with this radical abundance, fearless generosity place. And in my experience, as was said before, when we have greater purpose and we align with that, it's kind of amazing what kinds of things move. So yeah, I just wanted to name that in terms of conservation of the soil of our hearts and what kinds of seeds can be planted there. It seems really key for me. And showing up to honor Earth is never a bad plan. So there you go.
Yes, thank you for that. And I mean, for me, us also, and also showing up to honor each other. And so, and it's a way, a kind of a nice way for me to end, like to honor, for me anyway, each of you for being here today, as well as everybody who came to listen and to participate and to witness and to consider and to think. And I imagine everyone on this call today is engaged in different ways right at this moment. Yeah, Rachel.
Yeah, before you wrap up, I just wanted to share because when I heard Pat speaking, I really think for me, if anything, I wanted to just to cap up what I've learned from my fellow panelists and from this conversation. I would say, and this is recently also a personal conversation I was having with myself. I remember when I first started out in conservation, I would be complimented as saying, "Oh, you walk just like a man." And all of those stuff, and people really think they are complimenting me. And recently, I wrote that down and decided this is how I wanted to be identified. And then this aligns really well with our conversation about how you show up. And I said, I'm not a woman who's working as a man in a man's world. I refuse to show up as that. I refuse to be identified as that. I refuse to be celebrated as that. I am a woman, being a woman in a human world. And I actually think when it comes down to it, who are you? Is a very good question to ask. And why are you here on planet Earth is a place to start in helping you to understand better what kind of future you want to shape and how you really want to how you want to show up in that future and in the present, and how you really operate in that space, in your space, whatever it is.
Yes. Thank you, Rachel. And it's, you know, a reminder of, you know, well, this is something I think the three of you have all touched on, is this, our potential, the possibility, sort of the magic of it, the mystery of it, the role of, I loved too, Pat, when you said, when I heard you say, the role of reparations and repair. And I'm always thinking about, and there's always possibility of redemption. So the shame and fear that some of us may have about who we've been and even who we are right now, which I think a lot of that is showing itself, is an opportunity for, not to be corny about it, but an opportunity for healing, for addressing, for being redeemed, for anything that we feel we may have been connected to or done before, or even everything we may feel we have nothing to do with. Because if we're all interconnected, That means we're all interconnected and it affects us all. So I am thrilled to know that you are all in the world doing what it is you do where you are, even though it is far afield. It is far afield out here, but it is close to home in here. So I just want to say, oh, I was about to get emotional. Thank you for taking the time today to share your wisdom and your heart and your truth in this moment for other people to tap into when they are able. So thank you for that.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. Thank you so much, everyone. What an honor to be here with you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.